Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Empowering Musicians podcast. I am your host, Michael Manley, and I was really motivated by today's topic from my podcast of last week. So if you didn't check it out, my previous episode featured an interview with my guest, John McCann, who does a lot of consulting and leadership development in the area of the performing arts, but also other arts institutions such as museums. And he told me something that I just found really disturbing, and I wanted to kind of unpack it a little bit more. And if you're watching live and you want to put a question in the chat or a comment, welcome to do that. I love to always see comments from folks as we have the show going. I can't respond as a comment, but I can verbally respond. So if you do put in a comment, I will respond. So what was this information that was so kind of jarring to me? Well, John McCann said that philanthropy for the arts had actually declined as a percentage of the entire philanthropy pie. And so I thought to myself, well, I wonder why that is, because one of the things that we pay attention to as performing artists, or that we think, the assumptions we make is that, like, you know, obviously the 1% and the wealthiest among us have gotten more and more wealthy as time has gone by. Certainly, you know, what is considered like the 1% or the 10% have much more money today than they did, 50 years ago. But why it seemed like institutions were supported more 50 years ago than they are now. So one of the questions I had was like, why is that going down? And John referenced a report that was done by the Princeton Survey Research Associates, at least that's the one I found, which talked about how artists are perceived, and that there is generally that artists are not perceived to bring a lot of value to society, right? And this report, I should say, is from 2002, so it's a bit old. I don't know if there's been a follow-up report. If there's been one, I haven't found it. But the statistic that I wanted to really highlight had to do with different roles, right? So artists, as far as the social power of artists in society, right? So only 20% of adults think artists contribute a lot, whereas 82% of the public feels that teachers contribute a lot, right? And 52% feel that clergy contribute a lot. Doctors, 76%, scientists, 66%, right? So we, artists, are just 1 percentage point above elected officials, which is pretty scary when you think about it, because I don't know what your opinion is of your elected officials. Generally, it's pretty low, right? So in my mind, I'm thinking that, well, teachers and spiritual leaders, this is what artists are, right? This is part of what we do. And why is it that this study seems to show such a disconnect between artists and between other people in society? So I have some theories. I didn't get a chance to deeply go into this study, but one of my theories is probably that the word artist is a problem in the survey, right? So artist is an abstract term, whereas if they'd done the whole survey and they said painters, or they said musicians, or they said writers, maybe the results would be totally different. I don't know. But I think that artist is a problematic term in our society. And I've talked about this in terms of labor a lot. One of the reasons why artists is a problem is that we don't know what they do or who they are or what they get paid or anything. It's entirely a abstract term, right? Artist. Oh, you're an artist. What does that mean? It could mean writer. It could mean filmmaker. It could mean musician. It could mean dancer. It could mean actor. It could mean 100 things. And so I think part of the problem with maybe the orientation of this survey was just focusing on that word artist. And in fact, the survey talks about what do even people perceive artists as, right? And most of them think of it as, a painter, and then maybe some think of it as musicians. So interestingly enough, I talk a lot about this in my labor work, especially with how we speak about ourselves, right? So artist is a problematic term, right? So if I'm in a conversation with somebody and I mention that I'm an artist, it doesn't give them any indication of the fact that I professionalize what I do, right? Or that I'm doing this to make a living, right? So again, while I also write, usually my main artistic output is as a musician. So when I talk about myself, I'm going to talk about myself as a musician. I'm not going to say I'm an artist because nobody knows what I'm talking about. So I'm a musician, and moreover, I am a certain type of musician, right? And I am a working musician. So if you ask, again, if this whole survey was reframed as what is your perception of what working musicians contribute to society, there might have been a very different answer, because that's very specific versus artists. And so I like working musician because it indicates to the general public or whoever I'm in a conversation with that I actually am a worker, right? And people don't think of artists as workers. And that's a big problem in the nonprofit world in general. And again, part of why I question sort of the orientation of this whole survey, which is focused on artists. And I don't know who the Princeton survey organization is who produced this, why they produced it, what outcome maybe what they were trying to serve. You never know with data, right? Because people want to manipulate data all the time. But I think that when we're talking about ourselves, talking about the specific work we do makes a lot more sense. So I'm a painter, I'm a sculptor, I'm a dancer, I'm an actor. Much more clear than saying I'm an artist, right? Or I'm a working actor, I'm a working sculptor. Again, it highlights that we do what we do as a profession, that we expect and we demand to be paid for our work, right? That we're making a living from what we're doing. And I think that is the first step in trying to, change this dynamic of, if people don't know who we are, if they don't know what value we bring, that's a problem, right? Because as we learned last week from my colleague John, it does affect philanthropy, right? It affects how people contribute. If they don't see artists as valuable, they're not going to contribute, right? And this is really important because if you're not in the nonprofit world or you're not in the arts world, it's not a for-profit venture, especially the performing arts, right? So I'm not sure how it works with museums and other institutions, but for classical institutions like dance companies or symphony orchestras or operas or ballet companies, there's just no way to make a profit. There's no way to cover your costs from ticket sales and from what you do. So you have to have a value proposition which is larger than that, right? And that says, this is important and this is valuable and we want you as a community to invest in it for this reason. And I think part of why that hasn't happened is that we as institutions don't ever want to be vulnerable, right? So you can turn on the TV and you can watch a lot of how-to shows. You can watch a lot of competition shows, whether it's somebody learning to be a glass blower or somebody who's really at the top of their game in a very specific narrow field like that. You'll never see right now on television or on streaming any shows that are about a string quartet or about an opera company or about a ballet company. because we are terrified of being vulnerable, right? We do not want to show anything which is not perfected. So this, I think, is a problem when you're trying to make the connections that you need to make with your community and with your potential donors. Because if we're not vulnerable, we're not really being able to bond and being able to share totally with audiences and with folks. And you can't really tell your story if you're not vulnerable. So people like myself, we'll buy a ticket to an opera, we'll show up and we'll see an amazing performance, right? But what we won't see is anything that went into that performance. We won't see any of the rehearsal, probably. We won't see any of the mistakes that went in to trying to perfect that. And that's a problem, I think, is that we need to be vulnerable. We need to take artists out of being artists and being workers in their field, right? And that's why I, again, prefer this term working X, working dancer, working filmmaker, working musician, etc. So I think that's what we can do as artists. I think we have to show ourselves as really what we do and avoid the term artist if we can. I also think that we have to stress that we're working. And I think that we have to have our art form be about us and our stories, right? The New York Philharmonic right now has just moved into the recently renovated David Geffen Hall. And we talked a little bit about this last week with John McCann and how that was a $500 million project. And I've seen lots and lots of ink and digital and print media around the hall, and it's exciting because it's a brand new space. It's acoustically much more dynamic and much more personal. And I'm hearing some quotes of musicians, not enough. I would rather know like what the story is from the point of view of the artist. So imagine if the same amount of ink was being written not about the building, but about the artists themselves. So we have to be the face of what we do. And I think from an institutional standpoint, we have to be essential to our communities, and we have to be really of the community and not for the community. And this was something that John highlighted last week that I thought was really fascinating, and I hadn't really thought of it that way, right? Like, so instead of thinking how we serve the community, it's like, how do we be the community? And I think it's going to involve a lot of going to where the community is and being of the community and not forcing people, again, to come to you. And we have to be essential, right? And artistic excellence is the thing that most motivates performing artists, right? Whether you're a dancer or a musician or an actor, etc. Artistic excellence is the thing that gets us to put in the 10,000 hours to perfect what we do. And that's important. But we have to take the artistic excellence and then figure out how we use it in a way that is essential for our communities, right? Because it's very hard to just fund artistic excellence. I'm working with a nonprofit in my town, which is at the very early stages of growing. And, we're looking at our mission and it's like, well, our mission talks about our artistic excellence, which is great, except why would somebody fund that? Why would they care? What is the impact we're making versus who we are, right? So artistic excellence is, I think, the starting point, but it's not the end point. And I think that institutionally, we have to honor that. If you're an executive director or if you're on a board, I think you have to start there. You have to start by saying, look, we understand that we have this artistic excellence and that this is the core of who we are. And we need to do education work, and we need to do this over here. But I don't think they cancel each other out. And I think that some folks have gotten into trouble when they've gone to their artists and said, well, we need to be relevant to our community. And we, yeah, it's great that we're going to dance Swan Lake tonight, but your perfection is meaningless to me right now. I really want to talk about how you're influencing your community. So I think we have to honor the artistic excellence and never lose sight of that. But again, it's not the end, it's got to be the beginning. And I think that a lot of institutions have to celebrate the artists as the face of their institution. Again, if I'm thinking about big stories right now, I'm thinking about David Geffen Hall, right, in New York, and I'm thinking about how I would be there at the first concert if I still lived in New York. I really am excited about hearing the hall, hearing what they've done to it. But wouldn't it be great if the entire orchestra were on the side of the building, or there was quotes from every section in the paper around this? I would love to see that the musicians were more centered in that story than just the hall itself. And I wonder about that story as well. Like, I feel like we're at a kind of like a tipping point, right? Like we've had some really great halls open up in the last couple decades. We have Disney Hall here in the U.S. in California. We have the new Avery Fisher Hall, and now David Geffen Hall renovation happening in New York, and $500 million. I just wonder if that's reached its endpoint, right? If institutions in the next 20 years are going to be investing that much in their brick and mortar space, especially in this world where everything is porous and a mix of virtual and live. And I know that creates a lot of issues from a standpoint of compensation and labor and rules and all of that we are dealing with. But I think that it's inevitable, right? That we're going to have this access that is going to be, in a way, really exciting, and in a way made possible by technology. And we're going to have, I think, a certain amount of people that are always going to want to come to that brick and mortar space. But I think we're also going to have people say, you know what, in New York City, how many people from the from way out in Brooklyn or from the East Bronx are going to be able to make it to Avery Fisher Hall? And how are we relevant? How are we reaching and serving and being in those communities, as well as in this great jewel hall that we have? So, yeah, halls are great. They're important and they're kind of necessary, especially if you have orchestras and opera companies where sound quality is a key part of developing and honing the artistic excellence. But is that going to be something that continues down the road? I really wonder about that, because as John was musing last week, what could the New York Philharmonic done with $500 million if not put it into a building? What if they said, we have $500 million to reach every community in New York City, right? And we have $500 million to put to have a New York Philharmonic musician in every school in the New York City school system, right? There's all kinds of ways to look at impact that we make. But I think that what happens that I've seen where people get into trouble is they kind of apologize for the arts, right? It's like, well, we're trying to find a sustainable business model, and we just think we have to have the right size orchestra for our city, and we think that means X, Y, and Z. And the problem that I have with that is that nothing is sustainable in the arts. There's no such thing as a sustainable business model. If you put on one concert as a youth orchestra or as a community orchestra, you're losing money, right? Because you have to rent a space, whatever it might be. And so I think the value proposition has to be, how much do we value this? How much is this worth to our community? And that has to, I think, again, center the artist, not as a line item on a budget, as, oh, well, unfortunately, we have a 3% raise in our contract and our labor costs are going to be X, versus the artists are the product, right? The artists are the mission of our organization. They're core to what we do. And how are we going to all together make sure that we have the resources we need so that we can all thrive as an institution? And so I think when you go down the road of kind of looking at the cost as, building rental, wages for artists. If you start down that road, it's very hard to turn it around. And it's also really hard to go into a growth mode after you're into a recessionary mode, right? So thinking about, well, this is too pricey an institution, we need to downsize, right? Downsizing only goes one way in the arts, in my experience, when I've seen. And so it's very hard to build again after you go down that road. So I think I like to think of this as like infinite, right? Like there's, compared to what it costs, right? Like there's an infinite amount of money. I'm in Las Vegas, Henderson area. We have a lot of money in this community, and I have a tiny nonprofit that I'm trying to help build. And I'm just thinking, it's not that there's a fixed amount of money. It's that the money is infinite, but you have to make the right argument, and it has to be dynamic, and it has to be vital. It can't just be about, we want to give excellent concerts. It's got to be about the impact we're making in our communities, and how we're changing and for the better our communities, how we're relevant, and how we are serving those communities. This is a really interesting topic, and again, I was motivated by my friend John from last week, who said two things to me. One, that there was this study that said that artists are not perceived as having much value, right, to society. And the second being that philanthropy has gone down, right, for the arts as a sector. And I think that we can turn that around, and we have to. And in looking at some of the folks that I want to bring on the podcast going down the road, I'm really eager to talk, especially to some of my friends in the world of arts management, about this question, right? Like, how do we make this, how do we turn this around, right? And again, I think part of it is the problem with the word artist. I just think that that's a very problematic term, even though it's one that we all embrace, right? Like when you feel that you've put in the hours to really call yourself an artist, it's a very important self-designed label, right? When you say, you know what, I really am an artist. I've been on the stage at Carnegie Hall, or I've been at the New York State Theater on the stage doing Swan Lake. It's a really important label that we have for ourselves. But I think in terms of how we communicate our stories and how we communicate our value to the public, it's not as useful as, again, saying, I'm a working sculptor, I'm a working actor, I'm a working writer. Then somebody can build on that. They can have a conversation with you. Because again, I think artist is just too abstract, and I don't think it's helpful in terms of telling our stories, which are the key to getting people to support what we do. So again, I'm looking forward to bringing on some other guests in the coming weeks who are going to talk about this. And I'm lucky in that I have this network of people who are really all over the map, and I'm really excited that we're going to have somebody who does cosplay and started their own cosplay school here in Las Vegas in a future episode. And I'm going to have some arts managers, people who run small orchestras and other institutions. And I'm really going to try to dig into this and find out, how real this study is, and how we can all, how we're all working to turn this around. Because again, the thing that struck me was clergy and teachers being really, really high on this list. And I thought to myself, well, artists are spiritual leaders and teachers, right? So what is the disconnect? There is a disconnect if this study is true, and we have to all work to turn that around. So again, I think what you can do as an artist is focus on your skill. I'm a working actor, I'm a working musician, etc. And I think you have to be open to being vulnerable, especially in terms of showing everybody what goes into what we do. It's not just about the end result. And we're trained to not do this, right? We're trained that you can't ever have a mistake. You can't ever show that you're vulnerable. And I think we just have to turn that around. I also think we have to look at how we bring the arts outside of these monolithic institutions into the community, and how we show up where people are versus making them come to us. So these are some of the things that I'm really focused on, and I think are going to be subjects we do a deeper dive in future episodes. And I can't believe that I've been doing this maybe a year now. I think it's been almost a year that I've been doing this podcast, or maybe it will be shortly, but it's exciting. I'm very happy that we have some good viewers who show up, and you can always find other episodes on YouTube under Empowering Musicians Podcast, also on Spotify and Audible, and hopefully Apple iTunes soon. I just have to put in the administrative work to get that done. Looking forward to seeing you all for the next episode. I'm not seeing any comments, so I think we're good. And I will bid you all farewell, and we'll see you next time. Take care.